Deep in the woods, a ranger follows the rules of nature, but nothing can prepare him for the wild creature that appears on his doorstep, wounded and vulnerable. What starts as a simple rescue soon leads Rowan down a path where he'll question everything, including his understanding of the world around him. With every passing day, the stakes grow higher, and what once seemed like a straightforward choice turns into a life-altering decision. Intrigued? Make sure to subscribe, and drop a comment telling me your thoughts. Where are you watching from? The morning light in Pine Hollow crept slow and golden through the pines, turning the mist into ribbons of smoke. Inside a weathered cabin at the edge of the reserve, Ranger Rowan Hale, a tall black man in his late 30s, stood by the small iron stove waiting for the coffee to boil. He had worked these woods for 15 years, long enough to know that quiet was rarely peaceful. Quiet meant something was watching. When the faint thud came at the door, Rowan's hand froze halfway to his mug. It wasn't the kind of sound that came from wind or wildlife brushing the porch. It was deliberate, soft, uncertain, and human in rhythm, yet too primal to be a person. He reached for his sidearm, then stopped. Another sound followed, a sharp whimper, thin and cracked like air leaking through pain. Rowan's instincts kicked in. He moved to the window, peered through the fog, and what he saw made his breath snag. A dog, thin and trembling, stood on the porch. Mud clung to her fur, and her ribs pressed hard against her skin. In her mouth hung a limp puppy, small as a boot, its shoulder wet with blood. The mother's eyes locked with his through the glass. They were not wild or feral. They were pleading. Rowan had seen plenty of strays near the reserve, most too skittish to come close. This one had crossed the line between fear and faith. She had come straight to his door. Rowan's pulse quickened. His training whispered rules he'd lived by: never approach a wounded or desperate animal, especially a mother. But there was no growl, no bared teeth. The dog stood there, tail low, her entire body shaking, yet her eyes stayed fixed on him. She set the pup gently on the wooden step and backed away a few feet, lowering her head, not in submission, but in a silent plea. That single motion disarmed him more than any roar could. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Rowan cracked the door open. The smell of damp wood and iron mixed with the copper tang of blood. "Easy girl," he murmured, keeping his voice steady, his deep baritone calm against the morning hush. The mother didn't move closer. Her eyes flicked between him and her pup. Rowan knelt, stretching one gloved hand toward the tiny body. The puppy twitched, letting out a faint wheeze. The gash across its shoulder was deep, torn through the fur and flesh, fresh, ugly, and likely the work of another dog. He hesitated, his fingers inches from the pup, knowing that one wrong move could trigger the mother's rage. But instead of growling, she took another step back, trembling. It was as if she understood he was there to help. Rowan scooped up the small body, wrapping it in his old army flannel. Warm blood soaked through the fabric, hot against his palms. He turned toward the cabin, his pulse hammering in his ears. Behind him came the faint sound of claws scraping wood. The mother followed, but stopped at the threshold. She didn't attempt to enter. Instead, she placed her head on the step where her pup had lain, a silent guard at the gate. Inside, Rowan laid the pup on the kitchen table, pushed aside his gear, and grabbed the small metal kit he kept for injured wildlife. He'd stitched up hawk's deer, even a fox once, but never something that looked back at him with such fragile trust. His hands moved on instinct. Tweezers, iodine, gauze. He cleaned the wound slowly, whispering steady words. "Stay with me, little one. Stay with me." Outside, he could hear the low, steady breathing of the mother. She hadn't left. Rowan stitched the wound with careful precision, every pull of the thread, a promise he didn't realize he was making. The pup whimpered softly, then stilled. Rowan worked faster, checking its pulse, then wrapping the tiny shoulder in gauze. He lit the small space heater near the table and laid the pup close to the warmth, tucking it under an old towel. For a long time, there was no sound but the hiss of the heater and the slow drip of coffee on the stove. Rowan turned toward the door. The mother was still there, eyes half closed, exhausted but alert. She hadn't crossed the line into the cabin, as if respecting a boundary she instinctively understood. He crouched at the doorway, meeting her gaze. "He's alive," he said softly. "I'll do what I can." Her ears flicked at his voice, and for the briefest moment her tail moved once almost imperceptibly before she sank back to the porch. Rowan stood there watching her, struck by the surreal stillness of it all. A wild dog trusting a human, a ranger trusting his gut over his fear. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in the world, both in nature and in people. But that morning, standing in the pale gold light of Pine Hollow, he witnessed something far rarer, the courage of surrender. He took a breath, realizing how strange it felt to be trusted by something that should have feared him. The sky above Pine Hollow darkened quickly after sunrise, clouds thick as smoke rolling over the hills. Ranger Rowan Hale hadn't slept since dawn. The pup, still weak, breathed in shallow pulses beside the heater wrapped tightly in his flannel. Every few minutes, Rowan would glance toward the door, half expecting the mother dog to vanish like a phantom from the mist. But every time he checked, she was there, motionless, lying across the porch boards with her head on her paws, eyes open and fixed toward the inside of the cabin. It was loyalty without demand, patience without fear, and yet Rowan could not shake the instinct that told him danger still lingered. He'd seen wild mothers turn violent once their offspring were touched, even after hours of calm. His own nerves hummed beneath his steady exterior. The coffee he'd left on the stove had gone cold, but he didn't care. He was watching a wild creature fight her instincts just to trust him, and that kind of defiance against nature carried weight. He stepped outside quietly, the old door creaking on its hinges. The air smelled of rain. The dog lifted her head, but didn't rise. Mud clung to her paws, and her eyes glistened with something too complex to name. Rowan crouched near her, careful not to get too close. "He's breathing stronger," he said softly. She blinked once, and her ears flicked forward as though she understood. The quiet stretched between them, fragile but profound. Then thunder rolled across the hills, a deep, slow growl that trembled through the air. The mother dog turned towards the sound body, stiffening. A storm was moving in fast from the west. Rowan looked back at the horizon, watching the wall of dark rain creeping closer. He knew what that meant. Hours of isolation, the road to town washed out, and no radio signal strong enough to reach the ranger outpost. He'd be alone here with 2 lives depending on him. As the first drops fell, the mother dog rose to her feet. Her fur bristled her nose, twitching toward the wind. Rowan opened the door wider, instinctively, gesturing for her to come inside, but she stayed on the porch, shaking her head and backing slightly under the small overhang. "Suit yourself," he murmured, though part of him admired her resolve. He closed the door and returned to the table. The pup stirred, faintly whimpering. Rowan reached for the small syringe of antibiotics he'd prepared and gave the next injection, slowly murmuring words meant more for himself than for the animal. The rain started as a whisper against the roof, then built into a furious drumming. Lightning flashed and the cabin rattled. He looked toward the door again and felt his chest tighten. The dog was still there, drenched now, water streaming from her coat, but she refused to leave the porch. Each flash of light illuminated her in brief silver frames, head low, tail, still eyes open. She wasn't running from the storm. She was guarding it, guarding him, guarding what lay inside. For a long time, Rowan could do nothing but watch. He thought about the world beyond these woods, about people who had never looked at him the way that dog just had, with a trust untainted by doubt or prejudice. As a black ranger working deep in a mostly white conservation district, he had spent years walking the fine edge between respect and skepticism. People trusted his uniform, not always the man wearing it. But this creature, raw, wounded, wild, had walked into his world and offered him something truer than any handshake. Lightning cracked so close the cabin shook. He ran to the porch, pulling off his jacket. "Get in here," he shouted above the storm. The mother didn't move. Instead, she shifted closer to the door frame, shielding herself beneath the narrow lip of the roof, trembling but holding her ground. Rowan sighed, frustrated by her stubbornness and humbled by it at the same time. He laid the jacket beside her anyway, then ducked back inside. Hours passed. The storm grew worse. The power went out briefly before sputtering back. Rowan lit an oil lamp, the flame flickering across the rough wooden walls. The pup slept through the noise, its breathing steadier now. He kept a hand close to its tiny chest, feeling the faint rhythm of life pulsing through his palm. At some point near dusk, exhaustion caught up with him. He dozed off in the chair beside the table, the rhythmic patter of rain against the roof sinking into his dreams. When he woke, the storm had broken. The room glowed orange from the fire he'd started earlier. He looked immediately toward the door. Through the glass, he could see her still there, exactly where she'd been curled up on the porch beside his jacket, her body steaming faintly in the cool evening air. For a moment, Rowan just stared, moved by the strange loyalty of it all. He rose, opened the door, and stepped outside. The air smelled of wet pine and fresh earth. She lifted her head, blinking against the lamplight. He crouched and spoke in a low voice. "You stayed," he said, "after all that." The dog stretched her neck forward, sniffing at his hand. He stayed still, giving her the choice. Then, with slow, uncertain movement, she pressed her muzzle briefly against his fingers before pulling back again. It wasn't affection, not yet. It was permission. Rowan smiled faintly, a rare curve of warmth breaking through his usual stoic calm. "All right, girl," he said. "We'll get through this, both of us." The next morning in Pine Hollow broke gray and heavy with moisture. Mist clung low over the clearing, and the world felt smaller, wrapped in fog. Ranger Rowan Hale sat slumped beside the table, one arm resting protectively near the small pup, the other hanging limp from exhaustion. He had drifted in and out of sleep through the night, the steady rhythm of rain and the dog's faint breathing anchoring him between fatigue and worry. When the first shaft of light touched the window, he rose and checked the wound again. The gauze was soaked through. When he lifted it carefully, a sharp scent of blood and infection hit him. His stomach tightened. What he saw made him curse under his breath. The wound had deepened overnight, spreading under the fur like dark veins. This wasn't a simple bite. It was tearing through muscle, maybe even bone. His quick patchwork from the night before had bought time, not safety. The pup stirred weakly, crying in pain. Rowan steadied his shaking hands. "Hang on, little one," he muttered. He went to his gear locker, rummaging through old supplies. Disinfectant needles, a small surgical scalpel thread meant for field repairs. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The nearest veterinary clinic was over 40 miles away, and the road was still washed out from the storm. If he waited, the pup would die. If he acted, he might make it worse. Either way, the decision was his alone. The mother dog appeared at the door just as he laid the tools out. Her fur was still damp from the night, her eyes red-rimmed but alert. She stepped closer this time, crossing the line of the porch for the first time. Her claws clicked lightly on the floorboards, tentative but steady. Rowan's breath hitched. "It's okay," he said softly, keeping his tone low and even. The dog stopped just short of the table, nose twitching toward her pup. Rowan raised a hand. "Let me work." For a heartbeat, the air between them hung thick with tension. Then she lowered her head, lying down near the threshold, body tense but unmoving. He took that as permission. With no anesthesia strong enough for an animal this small, Rowan did what he could. He injected a diluted sedative and began cleaning the wound again. The pup whimpered once, then sagged into stillness. Rowan's training as a ranger had included emergency first aid, but performing it on something so fragile was another world entirely. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he cut away the infected tissue clean deep inside the wound, then began stitching his hands, trembling slightly despite his focus. He lost track of time. The sound of his own breathing merged with the faint hum of the heater, and the slow creak of the wooden floor. Every stitch felt like a gamble, every second like a countdown. At one point, blood began to flow heavier, and for a terrifying moment he thought he had gone too deep. "No, no, come on," he whispered, pressing gauze against the wound, applying pressure. The pup's chest fluttered weakly, then steadied again. He exhaled hard, whispering a shaky prayer. That was when he noticed movement near the door. The mother dog had risen, pacing in small circles just outside the light. Then she disappeared into the mist. Rowan froze, needle still in hand, heart hammering. Had he broken her trust? Did she think he was hurting her pup? He stitched faster, desperate to finish before she returned his mind, replaying every possible scenario: attack, retreat, loss. Then just as he tied off the last thread, he heard her pause again. She returned carrying something in her mouth, a torn piece of fabric, gray and soaked clearly from an old blanket or tarp. She dropped it at the door and looked at him, tail low but wagging faintly. Rowan stared, stunned. The dog had brought bedding. She had gone into the woods to find something warm for her pup. Somehow she had watched him work and decided to help. "You're unbelievable," he murmured, voice breaking slightly. He finished bandaging the wound, wrapped the pup gently, and placed it atop the damp fabric she'd delivered. She nosed closer, sniffing the edges of the bandage, and when Rowan didn't move, she laid her head beside her pup's tiny body. The air in the cabin shifted. The fear that had filled the space since dawn melted into something deeper, mutual acceptance, maybe even faith. Rowan cleaned his tools, washed his hands, and sat on the floor nearby, too drained to move. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing streaks of sunlight filtering through the trees. He thought of the other rangers who'd laugh if they saw him, now a grown man performing surgery on a stray dog with nothing but hunting thread and prayer. But sitting there watching the mother guard her pup, he felt more peace than he had in years. "You did good, girl," he said quietly. "He's got a chance now." The dog lifted her eyes, meeting his with a calmness that cut straight to his core. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something purer, like recognition. She seemed to understand that he had fought for her child, as she would have, that their instincts, though shaped by different worlds, came from the same place. The pup twitched, let out a small sigh, then nestled closer to her warmth. For the first time since the knock at dawn, Rowan allowed himself to believe they might all make it through. As night fell again over Pine Hollow, the cabin glowed faintly from the lantern's light. The storm was gone, the air still. Rowan sat in silence, staring into the small, flickering flame, listening to the synchronized breathing of mother and pup. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether infection or predators or the fragility of nature's mercy. But he knew one truth as sure as the pulse in his veins. In saving that pup, he had crossed another invisible line, one that bound him not by duty, but by choice. The fog rolled back over Pine Hollow as night descended again, bringing with it a heavy silence that pressed against the windows of the cabin like a living thing. Ranger Rowan Hale sat by the fire body, aching eyelids leaden, yet sleep was impossible. The small pup lay wrapped in his old flannel near the heater, breathing shallow and uneven, while the mother dog curled close by her head, resting just inches from the pup's fragile body. Every so often, Rowan adjusted the bandage, checked the pulse, or added another drop of warm water to the corner of the pup's mouth, anything to keep that thin line of life steady. The air smelled faintly of iodine pine smoke and damp fur. He had survived long nights before tracking lost hikers watching over wildfire perimeters, but none had ever felt this personal. This wasn't a matter of duty. This was a matter of heart. His hand brushed against the pup's chest again, and a wave of cold panic struck him. The faint rhythm beneath his fingertips was gone. He froze. The pup wasn't breathing. "No, no, come on," he whispered sharply, pressing his fingers harder, feeling nothing but stillness. He scooped the tiny creature into his palms, the body limp, the head rolling back like a broken doll. "Don't do this," he muttered, heart hammering. The mother dog raised her head, sensing the change instantly. Her low whine sliced through the silence, a sound raw with alarm. Rowan placed the pup on the table, forcing himself to think, to act. He tilted its head, blew a slow, steady breath into its nose and mouth, then pressed 2 fingers rhythmically against its chest, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3, breathe. The world narrowed to that cycle, that impossible task of forcing life back into something that had already begun to fade. His mind flashed to the first time he had done this for a human years ago on a rescue team when a teenager had nearly drowned in the creek north of the ridge. He had done the same thing then, shouting, pressing, begging the body to respond. That boy had lived. "You will too," he growled, teeth clenched as if sheer will could drag the pup back. The mother dog stood now, circling tail, stiff eyes, burning with a primal intensity. Then, without warning, she leapt onto the chair beside the table, close enough that her nose brushed the pup's fur. Rowan almost pushed her away, but stopped when he saw her actions. She wasn't panicking. She was doing something deliberate. She placed her nose directly over the pup's chest and began licking the wound in slow, methodical strokes, not random, but focused, as if she knew exactly what to do. Rowan stared, stunned, then joined her rhythm press breathe, lick, breathe. The seconds stretched into minutes. He didn't notice the tears that slipped down his face or the ache in his arms. Then, just as his strength began to falter, the smallest twitch rippled through the pup's body. The chest rose weakly, then fell. Rowan froze, staring. Another rise, then another. The pup gasped sharply, a rasping, wheezing sound that made both man and mother jerk in disbelief. Rowan let out a ragged laugh, half sob, half prayer. That's it, he whispered. The mother let out a deep, guttural sound, neither bark nor growl, more like a sigh from the soul itself. She nosed the pup, gently curling her body around it protectively. Rowan sat back, breath-shaking muscles trembling from the adrenaline crash. For a long time, the only sound in the cabin was the rhythmic breathing of 3 beings who had stared death in the eye and refused to yield. The fire flickered low, throwing shadows across the walls. Rowan leaned back against the chair, his pulse still racing. He had been trained to keep distance from wild animals, to treat nature with calculated respect, not intimacy. But there was nothing calculated about what had just happened. He had fought alongside a creature that should have feared him, and together they had pulled life back from the edge. It changed something deep inside him, something no rulebook or uniform could contain. He watched the pup sleep again, the faint movements of its chest now steady and sure. The mother's breathing slowed, her body pressed close, her eyes half closed in weary relief. Rowan couldn't stop thinking about how she had known what to do. Was it instinct, faith? Something older than either word, he didn't need to name it to feel its power. He reached for his notebook on the shelf, the same one where he recorded field reports and wrote a single line across a blank page. Trust is the only bridge that saves life. He stared at the words for a long moment, then shut the book. Outside, wind whispered through the trees, and the moon broke through the last of the fog, washing the clearing in soft silver light. The world looked clean again, reborn after chaos. Rowan stood, stretched his stiff shoulders, and added a few more logs to the fire. He poured a small cup of water, took a slow drink, then poured a few drops into a saucer for the mother. She lifted her head, sniffed it, and drank carefully. "You're something else," he said quietly. She glanced at him, eyes calm and unafraid. He reached down, resting his palm briefly on her back. The fur was warm, alive, trembling faintly under his touch. For the first time since she had appeared, she didn't pull away. Rowan knew she trusted him now, not in the way animals submit to humans, but as an equal who had earned his place. The fire crackled softly. By the third sunrise, Pine Hollow was washed clean and quiet again, but the air carried a tension that Rowan Hale could not ignore. The pup had survived the night, though his breathing still hitched at intervals that made Rowan's stomach twist. The stitches held, but the infection's edge hadn't relented. The skin around the wound remained swollen, the faint heat of fever radiating beneath the fur. Rowan knew the truth. His improvised surgery had only delayed what real medicine could stop. The veterinary clinic down in Marlow Ridge was 40 miles away, and the storm had gutted the main road, leaving the dirt track churned into a pit of mud and debris. Still, if he waited, the fever would spread. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion dulling his thoughts. The mother dog watched him from the corner of the room, her golden brown coat now dry, her eyes alert and waiting. She seemed to sense his hesitation. When he stood to pack his gear, she rose too, her body tensing like a soldier hearing orders. "You'll have to trust me again," he murmured, lifting the pup carefully into a small metal crate lined with blankets. The pup whimpered, once eyes fluttering open before slipping back into half sleep. Rowan secured the latch, tucked the crate under one arm, and opened the door. Cool air swept through the cabin, carrying the smell of wet soil and pine sap. The mother stepped outside first, scanning the clearing as though expecting danger. Rowan loaded the crate into the back of his aging Jeep, checked the fuel, and climbed in. As the engine coughed to life, the sound startled a few birds from the trees, but the dog didn't flinch. She took one look at the Jeep, then back at him, and began trotting alongside as he rolled forward. "You can't follow," he said through the open window, voice rough. But she didn't slow. The tires splashed through shallow puddles, mud spraying across the undercarriage, and still she kept pace, steady and determined. Rowan clenched the steering wheel tighter. The road ahead was worse than he'd imagined. Broken branches, fallen rocks, sections of standing water deep enough to drown the tires. He shifted into low gear and crawled forward, the Jeep jolting violently with each rut. In the rearview mirror, he could see her reflection darting in and out of sight, her paws throwing up streaks of mud. He wanted to stop to tell her to turn back, but something about her persistence kept him going. Every time he thought she'd fall behind, she reappeared closer than before, eyes fixed on the crate in the back seat. The drive turned into a trial of patience and faith. The pup whimpered now and then, weak but alive. Rowan kept one eye on the road and one on the temperature gauge. It crept higher with every mile, the old radiator groaning. The air grew thick with heat as clouds gathered again overhead. He could feel sweat running down his neck, soaking into the collar of his uniform. At one point, the Jeep sank halfway into a mud pit and stalled. "Damn it," he hissed, slamming his palm against the steering wheel. He climbed out, boots sinking to the ankle in sludge. The mother dog was there, immediately panting, circling the vehicle. Rowan grabbed a shovel from the back and began digging around the tires. Every motion felt heavier, his muscles screaming from lack of sleep. The mother barked sharply, startling him, then darted ahead into the brush. "Not now," he muttered, wiping his forehead, but moments later, she returned, dragging something in her mouth, a broken tree limb. She dropped it near the back tire. Rowan blinked, then laughed under his breath. "You really are smarter than you look." He used the limb for leverage, packed stones beneath the wheels, and with one final shove, the Jeep lurched, free, coughing mud from its treads. He jumped back, an engine sputtering, and drove onward. The dog kept pace again, unrelenting. After nearly 2 hours of struggle, they reached the first paved stretch near the old Ranger checkpoint. From there, the route to Marlow Ridge was smooth enough for the Jeep to pick up speed. The mother, now limping slightly, didn't stop. Rowan leaned out the window, shouting, "Stay back, it's too far." But she ignored him. The sight of her persistence struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. Every stride she took mirrored his own resolve. The pup shifted in the crate behind him, letting out a weak cry, and that was enough to silence any thought of stopping. When the clinic finally came into view, a low white building at the edge of the ridge, its sign swaying in the wind, Rowan could barely feel his hands. He pulled into the gravel lot and jumped out. "Dr. Voss," he yelled as he carried the crate inside. The woman, a middle-aged veterinarian with dark hair tied back, looked up in shock. "Rowan, what in God's name, pup?" he gasped. "Severe bite, high fever, stitched, but needs full care." She took the crate without another word, her trained calm replacing the panic in his chest. Nurses swarmed around, lifting the small body onto the steel table. Rowan leaned against the wall, trembling from exhaustion. Outside through the glass, he saw her, the mother dog sitting at the entrance, mud-caked and panting eyes locked on the door as though she knew exactly where her child had gone. The clinic team worked quickly, cutting the bandage, cleaning deeper into the wound, preparing injections and fluids. "You did good," Dr. Voss murmured. "You gave it a chance." Rowan nodded silently, his throat tight. He stepped outside to check on the mother. She rose instantly when she saw him, but didn't bark. Her chest heaved, her eyes shining with something like relief. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the small clinic as Rowan Hale leaned against the cold tile wall, arms crossed tightly over his chest. Through the glass window separating the operating room from the hall, he could see Dr. Morel Voss and her team working beneath the harsh white light. The pup lay tiny and still on the surgical table, its fur shaved around the shoulder, its small heart monitored by a flickering green line. Rowan's jaw clenched as the doctor's voice cut through the hum of machines. Compound fracture, torn ligaments. Whoever attacked this little guy meant to kill him. The words echoed like a hammer in Rowan's skull. He had seen brutality in nature, but hearing it framed like this, as though intention existed in the wild, made his stomach twist. The mother dog sat outside the glass door, her head tilted, her golden eyes tracking every movement beyond the window. She didn't bark or whine. She simply watched. Rowan stood between two worlds, one clinical and human, the other instinctive and animal, and he didn't know where he fit. Dr. Voss's assistant passed a metal tray forward, the instruments clinking softly. Rowan saw the glint of a surgical pin and swallowed hard. "We're going to have to set it with steel," Voss said without looking up. "It's the only way he'll ever walk again." "Do it," Rowan answered automatically, his voice rougher than he intended. The next hour stretched like a lifetime. The rhythmic beep of the monitor filled the sterile air, steady but fragile, a thin thread tethering the pup to life. Rowan's pulse matched at every beat, a silent plea. He caught glimpses through the glass, Dr. Voss suturing with precision, her gloved hands moving like a sculptor's, a nurse adjusting the IV drip, another checking vitals. Once the monitor flatlined for half a second, and Rowan's body tensed as though struck. "Come on, kid," he whispered under his breath. The line spiked again, faint but alive. "That's it," he muttered. The mother outside stood now, pressing one paw to the door, a gesture so human it made his chest ache. "She's been there since you brought him in," the receptionist murmured quietly behind him. "Haven't seen her blink." Rowan didn't respond. His focus stayed locked on that small heartbeat, the one he'd promised himself would not stop under his watch. The surgery dragged on for nearly 2 hours before Dr. Voss finally stepped back, pulling down her mask. "He's going to make it," she said, exhaling. "We pinned the bone. It'll take weeks of recovery, but he'll walk again." The words hit Rowan with more force than he expected. His shoulders sagged, tension breaking like a wave. He closed his eyes, whispering a thank you to no one in particular. Through the glass, he saw the pup, tiny body, covered with a clean bandage, breathing steady under the warm light. "Can I—" he started, but Voss cut him off gently. "Not yet. He'll sleep through the night. Go get some rest, Rowan." He turned toward the door. The mother dog was gone. His heart sank. He stepped outside into the fading light, scanning the parking lot, the line of trees at the ridge, the field beyond the fence. Nothing. Only the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of cicadas. For the first time since the storm, the silence felt wrong. She had followed him through the flood, stayed through the chaos, and now that the danger had passed, she had disappeared. Rowan stood still for a long while, hands buried in his jacket pockets, a hollow weight pressing in his chest. Maybe this was her way of saying goodbye. Maybe she had understood her job was done. He thought about the way she'd looked through the window, the way her paw had rested against the door. Faith not ownership. Trust not dependence. He wanted to believe that was enough, but the absence stung anyway. "You saved her, kid," Voss said softly from behind him. "Sometimes that's all they need from us." Rowan nodded without turning around. "Yeah, sometimes." He spent the night in the Jeep outside the clinic, too restless to leave. The stars were sharp and clear, scattered like glass across the sky. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, the glint of the scalpel, the steady line on the monitor, the mother's eyes fading into the dark. He woke at dawn to the sound of birds and stepped inside. Dr. Voss was already waiting. "He's still resting," she said. "Strong vitals." Rowan followed her into the recovery room. The pup was swaddled in blankets, its tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically. He reached out, brushing the soft fur along its head, careful not to disturb the bandage. "You're tougher than most men I've met," he whispered. The pup twitched in response, and for a brief moment Rowan thought he saw recognition in the half-open eyes. Later that afternoon, after signing paperwork and gathering medicine for the next few days, Rowan lifted the crate into his Jeep once again. The road back to Pine Hollow was quiet this time. No storm, no chaos, just the steady hum of tires over gravel. He caught himself glancing at the rearview mirror every few minutes, half expecting to see a golden shape trotting behind him. Each time, the road was empty. When he reached the cabin, the air felt heavier without her. He carried the crate inside and set it down on the same wooden step where the pup had nearly died days before. The drive back to Pine Hollow stretched across an afternoon painted in gold and fading blue, and by the time Ranger Rowan Hale reached the edge of the clearing, dusk was gathering like smoke between the trees. The air smelled of damp pine and earth fresh after the recent rains. In the back seat, the small crate rattled softly each time the Jeep bounced over a rut. Inside it, the pup, bandaged drowsy from medication, lifted its head, once blinked and settled again. Rowan glanced in the mirror, smiling faintly. "Almost home, little one," he said under his breath. The word home echoed differently this time, heavier, as if it carried two meanings, his cabin and the wild that surrounded it, both pieces of the same whole. When he pulled up near the porch, he killed the engine and sat for a moment in silence. The cabin looked unchanged, still weathered and simple, its window glowing faintly from the reflection of the setting sun. Yet the space felt emptier. He half expected to see a golden shape waiting on the steps, tail-curled eyes alert, but there was nothing, just the whisper of wind through grass. Rowan sighed, stepped out, and opened the back door. The pup stirred its tail, giving one weak wag. "Easy," he murmured, lifting the crate carefully. The wood creaked under his boots as he climbed the porch and set the crate down on the same worn step where days ago blood had soaked into the boards. He opened the latch and the pup stepped out uncertainly, sniffing the air, one front leg still stiff from the pin beneath the skin. The sight filled Rowan with quiet pride. The little survivor had fought harder than most creatures he'd known. He knelt beside it, resting a hand on its head. "You're tougher than both of us," he said softly. The pup looked up, tongue lolling slightly, as if understanding. It limped toward the edge of the porch, sniffing at the ground, and let out a single short whine. Rowan's gaze followed. The grass beyond was tall, the shadows long, and for a heartbeat, he imagined he saw something move between the trees, a flicker of gold, a shift of motion, but when he blinked, it was gone. He waited for several minutes, scanning the tree line, but only silence answered. The pup whined again and pressed against his knee. "Yeah," he murmured, "she's not here." Inside the cabin, Rowan set up a small bed for the pup, near the heater using the old flannel and a folded blanket. He prepared food and antibiotics, then sat by the fire while the pup ate clumsily, tail flicking against the floor. The warmth of the flames wrapped around him, but it couldn't quiet the ache that had followed him since leaving the clinic. He told himself the same thing Dr. Voss had said: sometimes they leave when they know it's safe, but part of him wished the mother had stayed even for a moment, even just to see her child breathing strong. Night crept in slowly, bringing the sharp chill of mountain air. Rowan rose to check the porch again. The moon had climbed above the pines, silver light spilling across the clearing. The world looked both alive and hollow. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing stirred. The pup limped to the threshold, sat beside him, and gazed out as if expecting the same ghostly figure. "She's gone," Rowan whispered, though the words felt heavier when spoken aloud. "She trusted us enough to walk away." The pup looked up at him, then back at the woods, ears twitching. Rowan's chest tightened with something he couldn't name. Pride, sorrow, gratitude, maybe all at once. He crouched, scratching behind the pup's ear. "You've got her eyes," he said. The fire crackled inside, and for a long while they stayed that way, man and dog framed in the golden light of the doorway, staring into the endless dark. At some point, fatigue pulled at his limbs. He carried the pup inside, laid it gently in the flannel bed, and sat back in the chair near the stove. His body felt heavy, but his mind refused rest. He thought of that morning when the mother had first appeared, the courage it must have taken for her to bring her child to a man she'd never met, and the strange sense of duty that had risen inside him since. He had spent years rescuing creatures, patrolling trails, writing reports, but this had been different. This had changed the way he saw the fragile line between fear and grace. He drifted into half-sleep, the rhythm of the pup's breathing guiding him. Sometime before dawn, he woke to the sound of movement outside, a faint crunch of leaves, soft but deliberate. His hand went to the flashlight beside him. He turned it off before it flicked fully on, deciding instead to listen. There it was again, closer this time, the quiet pad of paws across the porch. Rowan held his breath. He didn't move. The sound lingered for a moment, then faded away. He waited a full minute before rising. The pup stirred but didn't wake. He stepped quietly to the window, peering through the thin curtain. The clearing was empty, moonlight spilling like water across the grass. He saw nothing. Still, he left the door, unlocked his chest tight with an odd hope. When morning came, the world was drenched in pale sunlight. The air carried a sweetness only found after fog. Rowan opened the door and stepped onto the porch. His breath caught. Across the damp boards, faint but distinct, were a set of paw prints leading up to the step, larger than the pup's, fresh enough to still glisten with dew. They stopped exactly where the crate had been. Rowan crouched, tracing one print with his fingers. "You came back," he murmured. His voice broke slightly. He looked toward the trees again, the golden light filtering through branches, but she was gone. It didn't matter. She had come quietly in the night, checked on her child, and left again without a sound, trusting that her duty had passed into his hands. Rowan stood there for a long moment, the weight of understanding settling over him. He wasn't just her helper anymore. He had become her replacement, her choice of safety. The prints glistened a moment longer before drying under the rising sun. He smiled faintly, almost painfully, and whispered, "Goodbye, girl." The weeks that followed unfolded in slow rhythm, marked by sunlight routine and the sound of small paws learning to run again across the wooden floor. The pup's strength returned faster than Rowan expected, and with every sunrise it seemed less like a patient and more like a creature born to defy the quiet life inside four walls. Its fur grew thick and gleaming, its limp fading into confidence. Rowan, for all his years spent saving animals and sending them back into the world, found himself dreading the day he would have to do it again. The mother's paw prints on the porch had faded under rain, but the memory of them hadn't. Sometimes when the night wind sighed through the pines, Rowan would think he heard her low hum of breath, a call, or maybe just the echo of his own thoughts. He worked longer hours at the station, avoiding the decision waiting for him at home. But each time he returned, the pup greeted him with such energy that it almost hurt to remember where it truly belonged. The little dog would stand at the doorway, nose pressed to the gap beneath the door, sniffing at the forest air, as though sensing something it couldn't name. Rowan saw it every time and felt the truth digging deeper. It didn't belong to him, and it never had. The pup was part of a story that had started long before he opened his cabin door that morning. He had merely been the bridge. Late one afternoon, after finishing his patrol, Rowan sat on the porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The pup, strong now restless, sat beside him, ears pricked toward the tree line. "You're ready," Rowan said quietly. The words fell heavy like lead against the calm. The pup turned its head, tail wagging once, unaware of what was coming. Rowan stood, his boots scraping against the wood. The air carried that sharp, bittersweet scent of early autumn when the first leaves turned gold. He packed a small satchel with what he could, water-dried food, a strip of his old flannel, and whistled softly. The pup bounded over, panting with excitement, unaware of the farewell stitched into every motion. They set off down the dirt road past the same pines that had watched a desperate mother cross weeks before. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting patches of light that danced over the trail. Rowan's jeep sat idling near the edge of the reserve, but this wasn't a journey for engines. It was for endings. They walked together toward the clearing where forest met meadow. Rowan knelt there, unhooking the small collar he had fashioned from rope. He rubbed the pup's head, the fur warm and soft against his rough palms. "You made it," he murmured. "You survived everything. You proved us both right." The pup tilted its head, licking his fingers. Rowan swallowed the ache in his throat. "Your world's out there now, not in here." He stood slowly, his back stiff from days of strain, and pointed toward the open grass. "Go on." The pup hesitated, glancing between him and the trees, uncertain. Rowan stepped back. "Go," he said again, his voice breaking despite his effort to steady it. After a heartbeat, the pup turned and began to trot across the clearing, pausing once to look back. Rowan raised his hand in a quiet salute. "Find her," he whispered. "She's waiting." The pup continued, crossing the last line of grass into the shadows. For a moment, the forest swallowed everything, sound, light, not even time. Then movement caught Rowan's eye. At the far edge of the trees, something golden shifted between the branches. He squinted, breath-catching. There she was, the mother, standing in the low sunlight, like a memory turned real. Her fur gleamed bronze, her shape proud and calm. The pup saw her and broke into a run. She stepped forward to meet it, her posture regal, her tail lifting in silent recognition. When they met, she lowered her head and licked its muzzle, the bond sealed once more in a gesture older than words. Rowan stood, frozen tears welling despite himself. The mother lifted her gaze toward him, eyes catching the dying light. For one suspended heartbeat, they looked at each other across the clearing. No fear, no distance, only understanding. Then she turned and slipped back into the forest, the pup bounding close behind her. Their bodies vanished into the gold and shadow, leaving nothing but the whisper of leaves. Rowan stood there for a long time, his chest hollow, yet strangely full. He thought of the first knock at dawn, of trembling hands and fragile breaths of storms survived, and nights shared in silence. He realized that every step since had led here to a return, not just for them, but for himself. He walked back to the cabin in the deepening dusk, each sound of the forest echoing like a heartbeat he had learned to trust. When he reached the porch, he noticed the prints again, fresh, small, and faintly pressed into the mud. 2 sets this time, side by side, leading into the woods. He smiled through the blur in his vision, whispering, "You did it, girl. Autumn in Pine Hollow came with a deceptive calm. The fields turned amber, the air sharpened with the scent of frost, and the forest seemed quieter than it had been in years. For Rowan Hale, quiet rarely meant peace. He had seen what the woods could hide beneath silence. It had been 3 months since the pup's release, 3 months since he had watched that flash of gold vanish into the wild. Yet not a single day passed without thinking of them. He still found tracks, sometimes light impressions near the creek, a single paw print along the riverbed, but they were always faint, always fading. Still, he took comfort in their existence, signs that life continued out there somewhere. On this late afternoon, Rowan was making his last patrol before the first snowfall. The Jeep rattled along the narrow trail, its old engine growling in protest. The path curved through thick pine and open scrubland, a stretch notorious for its unpredictability. He had planned a short route, just enough to check the fencing on the north line, but as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the engine gave a sputter and coughed twice before dying completely. Rowan cursed softly, slamming the steering wheel. He twisted the key again. Nothing but silence. The radio crackled with static. The storm last night had cut off signal. He stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. The light was fading fast, and the air carried that still tension animals recognized before nightfall. He opened the hood, examining the tangled mess of wires and grease, but it was hopeless. The Jeep wasn't going anywhere. He stood there listening. The forest responded with faint rustles, then fell quiet again. Then came the sound, low, distant, but unmistakable. A growl. It came from the slope to his left where the trees stood close together. Another followed, higher pitched. Rowan froze. The scent hit him next, musky and sharp. Feral dogs. A pack. He counted the shadows moving between the trees. 3, then 5, maybe more. Their shapes circled, closing and cautious, but deliberate. He'd seen this kind of behavior before, testing, measuring. Packs like these didn't fear humans. They had learned hunger, erased boundaries. Rowan stepped back toward the Jeep, heart pounding, calculating his options. The rifle was strapped inside the cabin, but there was no time to reach it. The first dog appeared from the brush, its coat-patchy eyes burning with that wild glint of desperation. It bared its teeth and barked once sharp and loud, the signal for the rest to close in. Within seconds, they surrounded the Jeep, 7 or 8 strong tails, stiff bodies low to the ground. Rowan climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut just as the first one lunged, teeth scraping the metal. He fumbled for the radio, again static answering him like mockery. He could wait, maybe scare them off with sound, but the night was deepening fast, and he knew the longer they circled, the bolder they would grow. He sat perfectly still, breath shallow, listening to the claws scratching against metal and glass. One of them jumped onto the hood, snarling, its teeth flashing under the thin moonlight. Another began tearing at the spare tire on the back. Rowan's pulse thudded in his ears. Easy, he whispered, more to himself than to them. He reached for the flare gun in the glove box. The dogs paused at the click of metal growls deepening. He fired through the open window. The flare streaked upward, hissing scarlet across the night sky. The pack scattered for an instant, then regrouped, angrier than before. They had learned this game too. The flare sputtered and died, plunging the clearing back into dark. Rowan locked his jaw. His mind raced. If they broke through the glass, he wouldn't last 5 minutes. One of them lunged again, striking the side mirror. Another hit the door, denting it with force. The sound of snapping jaws filled the air. Then over the chaos came something new. A distant, thunderous bark, deep and commanding, rolling through the forest like a drumbeat. The pack froze. The leader turned toward the sound, ears flattening. The bark came again, closer, this time echoing from the ridge above. Rowan's eyes widened. It couldn't be. Another sound followed, the heavy beat of paws against earth. The pack wavered, growls breaking into uneasy whines. Then from the shadows burst 2 figures, fast and fierce. The first was massive, a dog with broad shoulders, Golden fur streaked darker along the back, his stride full of strength and certainty. The second followed, leaner but no less powerful, the mother, her movement sharp and calculated. They descended on the pack like a storm. The golden male hit the largest feral dog, first slamming it to the ground in a blur of teeth and motion. The mother circled wide, driving the others back with snarls that cut through the air like thunder. Rowan watched in disbelief, his breath caught between awe and fear. The feral pack, suddenly outmatched, turned to flee, scattering into the trees one by one, until only silence remained. The golden pair stood panting in the moonlight, their fur-bristling breath steaming in the cold. Rowan sat motionless behind the glass, unable to speak. He recognized the tear on the mother's ear, the same mark he'd seen the first time she appeared at his door. And the golden male beside her, the pup grown tall and strong, his shoulders heavy with muscle, his chest proud. The one he had carried in his arms, stitched, saved, released. They stood now as guardians, where once they had been the saved. The mother turned first, her gaze finding the jeep. Rowan's heart thudded. For a moment, her expression softened, calm and certain. She took a slow step forward, stopping a few feet from the door. The young male followed his eyes, alert but not hostile. They didn't come closer. Instead, they positioned themselves between the jeep and the forest facing outward. Rowan realized what they were doing. They weren't attacking. They were standing guard. He opened the door slowly, stepping out into the cold. "You came back," he whispered, voice breaking. The mother's ears flicked, and the golden male let out a low rumble, not of warning, but of recognition. Rowan's throat tightened. He wanted to move closer to thank them, but instinct held him back. The forest went quiet after the golden pair vanished, leaving behind only the trembling of leaves and the echo of their roars drifting through the trees. Rowan Hale stood in the cold moonlight, his breath sharp in his throat, the smell of mud and burnt metal hanging heavy in the air. His hands still shook from adrenaline as he looked at the empty trail where the feral pack had fled. The night that had promised death had instead delivered something else. Redemption returned balance. He leaned against the jeep, the metal cold beneath his palms, and let out a slow breath. The radio hissed faintly again, a broken voice bleeding through the static. "Ranger Hale, do you copy?" He pressed the button hard. "Copy," he said hoarsely. "Vehicle disabled. Location Pine Hollow West Road. I'm all right." He paused, glancing toward the trees. "Send recovery." The reply crackled back, faint and confused. "Say again you're alone out there." Rowan smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the forest. "Not entirely," he murmured, but didn't explain. The night passed in fragments. He stayed in the jeep, the heater off his jacket pulled tight around his shoulders. Every few minutes he thought he saw motion along the ridge, a flicker of gold, a shimmer between shadows, but each time he blinked, it was gone. When dawn finally broke pale and trembling, the first sound he heard wasn't the rescue truck, but birdsong. The world looked renewed, every leaf wet with dew, the air clean as glass. The jeep's headlights caught the edge of movement far down the slope, but when Rowan leaned forward, there was nothing there, just the open wild stretching endlessly in morning light. He could still feel them, though not in sight, but in presence, as if the land itself carried their echo. The backup team arrived an hour later, rumbling up the trail in a second Ranger Jeep. Two officers jumped out, faces creased with disbelief as they surveyed the dented metal and torn tire marks around the clearing. "Looks like you went through hell," one said. Rowan nodded, still staring into the trees. "Something like that." The other crouched near the prints left in the mud, large, deep, unmistakable. "Wolves?" he asked. Rowan shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "not wolves." They pressed for answers, but he offered none. There were truths words couldn't hold, and this one belonged to silence. They winched his jeep out, checked for injuries, and radioed headquarters, but Rowan barely heard them. He kept glancing at the tree line, searching for one last glimpse, one final sign. By noon, the forest was empty again, calm as if nothing had ever happened. As they drove back toward the cabin, Rowan stared out the window, letting the rhythm of the road steady his heart. The younger officer broke the silence. "You sure you were alone out there?" Rowan smiled faintly. "No," he said, "but I think that's the point." When they reached the cabin, the other rangers stayed to assess the damage on his Jeep, but Rowan stepped away, drawn toward the porch. The board still held the faint memory of paw prints washed away by rain. He crouched beside them, tracing where they had been, and felt the same quiet weight settle in his chest. The weight of connection, of understanding something pure, beyond language. The older ranger joined him. "What really happened out there?" Hale Rowan straightened slowly, his gaze still on the woods. "Just a favor returned," he said simply. That night, long after the others had left, he sat alone by the fire. The cabin glowed warm against the dark, the only sound the crackle of flame. He poured himself coffee, black and strong, and stared through the window toward the endless sea of pines. He thought of that first morning, the knock at dawn, the desperate mother, the trembling pup, the choice that had changed everything. The world had a way of circling back, of testing whether mercy truly ran both ways. He had given trust, and trust had come back when he least deserved it. He ran a hand over his face, exhaustion washing through him, and smiled faintly to himself. "You kept your promise," he whispered to the empty room. The fire hissed softly, a single spark leaping upward before fading. When he stepped outside, the moon had risen again, bright and full. The Jeep sat in the clearing, its body scraped, its mirror cracked. He walked toward it, running a finger along the dented door, and stopped. There, caught on the rough edge of metal, was a single golden hair gleaming against the black paint. He pinched it gently between his fingers, feeling the coarse warmth of it, and knew immediately whose it was. A laugh escaped him, quiet and breathless. "So it was real," he said aloud. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain, and in that moment, he felt less like a man standing alone, and more like part of something vast and living. The forest didn't owe him proof, but it had given it anyway. He tucked the hair into his jacket pocket and looked out over the horizon. The mountains burned orange in the dying light, the same hue as the mother's coat, as the pup's eyes. It felt less like farewell and more like understanding. The debt was balanced, the circle closed, and the wild had spoken in the only language it knew: action, not promise. He stood there until night thickened, then turned back toward the cabin. Tomorrow would bring more patrols, more reports, more small moments that would never make sense to anyone but him. But that was all right. Some stories didn't need witnesses to be true. Inside, the fire had dwindled to embers. Rowan took off his jacket, set his badge on the table beside the coffee cup, and sat down in silence. The forest outside breathed slow and steady, its pulse matching his own. He knew then that his years of service had never been about control or protection. They had always been about coexistence. That was the final lesson the wild had chosen to teach him, that empathy is the one bridge that can cross any species, any divide, any history. He closed his eyes, hearing again the bark that had cut through the night, the echo of loyalty that no human law could command. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, two shadows moved together through the moonlight, guardians returning home. Rowan smiled in the half-dark, whispering a farewell that wasn't sorrow, but gratitude. "Good night, girl. Keep him safe." The wind rustled in reply, a soft sigh through the needles of the pines. For the first time in years, Rowan Hale felt whole. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible tales. Let me know what you think about the plot. Did it hit you as hard as it did me? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from.